I always thought my home would be my safe place. The one corner of the world where I would always belong. After all, hadn't I given my whole life to building it? Every brick, every curtain, every meal. My fingerprints were everywhere. My children were raised under this roof, their laughter echoing in the walls, their footsteps marking the floors I polished till they shone. I never imagined there would come a day when this same house would feel foreign, when even my presence inside it would be questioned. It happened on an ordinary evening. The sun had slipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft orange, and I had just finished folding the laundry. My knees ached as they always did, but I kept moving. That was my way, to keep going, to stay useful. The children were in the next room. I could hear their voices, low and serious, the kind of tone people use when discussing money or secrets. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. "She's becoming too much," one of them said. Too much. Her medicines are expensive. Doctor visits, hospital bills, and she eats a lot too. Honestly, we can't keep this up forever. My heart stopped. She doesn't even realize how much we're spending. It's like she thinks money grows on trees. Sometimes I think maybe it's better if she stays somewhere else, somewhere that can take care of her needs. Somewhere else. The words pierced me like a knife. My children, the ones I had carried in my womb, fed with my own hands, stayed up sleepless nights for, were whispering about sending me away. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the folded clothes slipping from my arms. My ears rang, my chest tightened. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that it was a misunderstanding, but deep inside I knew the truth. My children no longer saw me as their mother, but as a burden. I retreated quietly, making sure they didn't see me. In my room, I sat on the bed, staring at the walls. My mind replayed their words again and again. Too much, costs too much, needs too much. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had shed enough tears in my life. When I lost my parents, when my husband passed away, when I sacrificed my dreams so my children could have theirs. But this pain was different. This wasn't loss. This was betrayal. For hours that night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Every sound, the ticking clock, the distant barking of a dog, felt heavy, as if the world itself had grown colder. I thought of the days when my children were young. They never called me a burden then. They clung to me, begged me for food, cried in the night until I held them. Did they ever imagine their mother as someone too much back then? Of course not, because in those days, I was their everything. And now I was an expense, an obligation, a mouth to feed. That night I whispered to myself, "No, I will not break. I will not let their words destroy me." I may have grown old, but inside me still lived the woman who had survived poverty, heartbreak, and loneliness. If they saw me as weak, I would show them strength. If they saw me as costly, I would prove my value could never be measured in money. I did not know how, but I knew one thing. This was not the end of my story. This was the beginning. The next morning I rose early, long before the children stirred. The house was still dark, the air cool and quiet. I moved slowly, my bones heavy with age, but my mind alert. Sleep had escaped me, chased away by the words that echoed in my ears. Too much. Cost too much. Maybe send her away. I lit a small lamp in the corner of the kitchen, just as I used to when they were little. Back then it was to cook their porridge before school, to iron their uniforms, to pack their lunches with care. Now, it was to remind myself I still had purpose. As I prepared tea, I found myself listening carefully. Every sound, a floorboard creak, the shuffle of slippers, made me tense. I wondered if they would say more today, if their whispers would turn into decisions. When my daughter-in-law entered, rubbing her eyes, I smiled warmly, though inside my chest ached. "Good morning, Beta. I've made tea." She blinked in surprise. "You're up early?" "Yes," I replied softly, handing her the cup. "Old habits don't leave easily." She took it without much thought, already scrolling through her phone. I watched her, and for the first time I felt invisible in my own home. She didn't notice the trembling in my hand, or the tears I had swallowed down. To her, I was just there. Later that day, as my son left for work, he mumbled a goodbye without looking at me. I studied his face, searching for the boy I once knew. The boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The boy who once cried when I was sick. Where had he gone? When had his eyes grown so cold? The wound inside me deepened, but I did not speak of it. Not to him, not to her, not to anyone. I carried it like I carried everything else in life. Silently. But silence has power. It sharpens the mind, focuses the heart. And in my silence, I made a decision. If they saw me as a burden, I would become a blessing. If they measured my worth in money, I would show them wealth they could not count. So I began with small things. When the grandchildren left their toys scattered, I picked them up quietly. When clothes piled high in the basket, I folded them neatly. When the garden looked tired, I pulled weeds, planted seeds, and coaxed life back into the soil. I cooked meals with the same love I once did, seasoning them with patience and memory. My hands were slow, yes, but they carried the wisdom of decades. When the children tasted the dishes, I saw their faces soften, even if they didn't say much. Each day I gave, not because I had to, but because I chose to. My giving was no longer about duty. It was about dignity. And slowly, very slowly, I began to notice changes. The grandchildren lingered near me, drawn to my stories, my songs, my quiet presence. They didn't see me as expensive or troublesome. To them I was comfort. I was love. Even my daughter-in-law, who once brushed past me, began to pause. "Ma, how did you make this curry? It tastes just like my childhood," she asked one afternoon. I smiled, my heart aching and healing at once. "It's made with patience, Beta. That's the secret." And my son, though he still carried the weight of work and worry, I noticed him watching me sometimes. His eyes were not as soft as they once were, but not as hard as before either. I did not confront him. Not yet. I wanted him to realize on his own. I wanted him to feel, not be forced to see. Because true change is not born from shouting. It is born from silence that teaches, from love that persists even when unreturned. But make no mistake, my silence was not weakness. It was strength, the kind of strength that comes from knowing your worth, even when the world refuses to acknowledge it. At night, when I lay in bed, the pain of their words still returned. The wound was still there, raw and deep. But now, alongside the pain, there was something else. Resolve. They may whisper that I am a burden, but I will live in a way that leaves no doubt. My life has meaning, my presence has value. My love is a gift, not a cost. And so I prepared myself for the days ahead, because I knew there would come a moment when the truth could no longer remain hidden, when my children would be forced to face what they had said. And when that moment arrived, I would be ready, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a dignity they could not ignore. The weeks passed slowly, each day heavy with unspoken tension. I lived in the same house, ate at the same table, but I was no longer blind. Their whispers had carved cracks in my heart, and though I tried to cover them with patience, I knew those cracks were spreading one evening. As the monsoon clouds gathered outside, I overheard another conversation. This time they didn't lower their voices enough. My son said, "The old age home called back. They have a room available. If we decide soon, we can move her there by next month." My daughter-in-law sighed in relief. It would be easier, really. She would have people her age care she needs. And we could focus on the kids. Focus on the kids. As if I had never focused my entire life on them. I clutched the edge of my chair, my knuckles turning white. The walls of my room seemed to close in, the very air suffocating me. A room available. They were planning my exile as if it were a business transaction. That night, I did not cook, did not speak. I moved like a ghost through the house, silent and invisible. My grandchildren tugged at my sari, asking for stories. But even then, my voice trembled. I kissed their foreheads, hiding my tears in their hair. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake staring into the darkness. My heart raced, my breath shallow. I whispered to myself, they are my children. How can they not see? How can they forget everything I gave? Memories rushed in. Nights I stayed awake with fevers. Days I went hungry so they could eat. Years of labor so they could study. Each memory was like a lantern, illuminating all the sacrifices that had brought them here. And now, they wanted to put me away. For the first time in many years, I cried openly. Not the quiet tears I could swallow back, but the heavy sobs of a mother betrayed. The sound of my own weeping startled me. Raw, unfamiliar, but cleansing. The next morning, I decided something had to change. I could not let them dictate the story of my life. I had spent too many years giving, serving, loving. I would not end my days being labeled as too much. So I gathered my strength and began preparing. I didn't know for what exactly. But I knew I could not remain silent forever. One afternoon, my granddaughter sat beside me while I was weaving an old mat. "Dottie," she asked innocently, "why do you work so much? Mama says you should rest." I looked at her, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. I smiled faintly. "Because, Beta, these hands know no rest. They were made to give. And even if the world forgets, the heart remembers." She hugged me tightly, and in that small embrace, I felt the strength to face what was coming. The breaking point arrived sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday. The whole family was gathered in the living room, and I walked in quietly, carrying a tray of tea. As I set it down, I heard my daughter-in-law say, "We should finalize the papers this week. It's better for everyone." My son nodded. "Yes, it's time." The words echoed in my ears like thunder. I placed the tray down slowly, my hands trembling, and before I knew it, my voice rose. Steady, clear, louder than it had been in years. "Time for what?" I asked, looking directly into their eyes. The room fell silent. My grandchildren froze, sensing the tension. My son shifted uncomfortably. "Ma, we were just—" "I know what you were discussing," I interrupted, my voice shaking not with weakness, but with the force of years of unspoken pain. "You think I don't hear? You think I don't know? You call me a burden. You weigh my life in bills and medicines, forgetting the years I carried you without complaint." Tears welled in my daughter-in-law's eyes, but she said nothing. My son opened his mouth, but no words came out. I stepped forward, my frail body trembling, but my spirit unshaken. "If you truly believe I am too much, then say it to my face. Tell me, after all I have given, that I am nothing more than a cost to you." The silence was deafening. My grandchildren clung to me, their small hands gripping my sari. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, my son whispered, "Ma, we didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" I asked, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "I gave you my youth, my health, my dreams, and now you want to send me away, as if I am luggage too heavy to carry. Is this what motherhood means? To be useful until you are not, and then discard it?" My voice cracked, but I stood tall. "No, I will not go. If this house cannot hold me with love, then I will leave on my own terms. But I will not be pushed away like garbage. I am not a burden. I am your mother." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My children sat frozen, unable to meet my gaze. And in that silence, I realized something powerful. I had finally reclaimed my voice. After that night, the air in the house was different. It was thick with unease, the kind that lingers after a storm. My words had shaken them. Not because they didn't know the truth, but because they had been forced to face it out loud. I could see it in their eyes. Shame, guilt, but also a kind of stubborn silence. They didn't apologize, not directly, Perhaps pride held them back, but I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I had already made my choice. The next morning I rose early as always. I swept the courtyard, watered the plants, and prepared tea. Not because they expected it, but because I wanted to. These small acts grounded me, reminding me that I still had control over my own life. When my son entered the kitchen, he looked at me awkwardly. You don't have to do all this. Just rest. I looked at him, my eyes steady. Resting is for the tired. I am not tired, Beta. Not yet. What I need is respect, not pity. He lowered his gaze, unable to respond. And in that moment, I realized something. I could not change their hearts overnight. But I could change how I carried myself. So I began to live with new purpose. I joined the women in the neighborhood who gathered every evening under the banyan tree. Most of them were widows like me, some abandoned, some simply lonely. We shared our stories, our sorrows, our laughter. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not as a burden, but as a woman with wisdom to offer one day. When a young widow cried about her in-laws treating her as useless, I held her hand and said, "Listen to me, child. Your worth is not measured by what they think of you. Your worth is in the love you give, the courage you carry. Don't let anyone call you less than you are." Her eyes shone with tears, and she whispered, "Auntie, you've given me strength." In that moment, I realized that even if my own children forgot my value, the world still needed my voice. My pain had carved wisdom, and that wisdom was not meant to be silenced. At home, I continued with quiet dignity. I no longer waited by the door for my son to speak kindly, or for my daughter-in-law to smile. If they did, I received it with grace. If they didn't, I carried on. But my grandchildren, they were my light. They clung to me, listened to my stories, and asked me questions no one else bothered with. They saw me not as a cost, but as comfort. In their innocence, they reminded me of the truth. Love is never wasted, even when ignored. One evening, while braiding my granddaughter's hair, she asked softly, "Daddy, are you sad because Mama and Papa don't listen to you?" I paused, then kissed her forehead. "Beta, sadness comes when we expect too much. I have learned to expect nothing, and to give everything. That is how love survives." Her little arms wrapped around my neck, and I held her close, my heart swelling. I knew then, even if my children failed to honor me, I would leave behind the seeds of love in my grandchildren. One day they would remember me not as a burden, but as a blessing. The whispers in the house quieted after my confrontation, but the tension remained. I could still feel the undercurrent of their thoughts, the worry about money, the frustration of responsibility. Yet, they spoke less openly now, perhaps ashamed, perhaps wary of my newfound strength. One day, my son hesitated before leaving for work. If you ever feel unhappy here, you can tell me. We'll find another arrangement." I looked at him, my heart aching with both love and sorrow. Beta, happiness is not about where you live. It is about how you live, and I will live with dignity, no matter what. He nodded, unable to meet my gaze, but I saw the struggle in his eyes, a flicker of realization, perhaps even respect. In those days, I understood something important. Dignity is not given. It is claimed. If I allowed their whispers to define me, I would become the burden they imagined. But by standing tall, by continuing to give, to love, to inspire, I was proving that life's value is not measured in rupees or responsibilities, but in the quiet strength of the soul. And though my body was frail, my spirit was strong. Strong enough to carry not just myself, but others too. The world outside might see me as an old woman. My children might see me as a cost, but I had chosen to see myself as more, as a teacher, a survivor, a bearer of love. And in that choice, I found peace. The years rolled forward like a quiet river. Seasons changed. Summers baked the courtyard. Winters wrapped the nights in silence, and monsoons washed the dust from the air. Through it all, I lived with the same steady rhythm. I gave what I could, loved without expectation, and carried myself with dignity. The whispers that once cut like knives faded, not because my children had grown kinder overnight, but because something in me had shifted. I was no longer desperate for their approval. My worth no longer depended on whether they saw me or not. Yet life has a way of teaching lessons when we least expect it. One day, I fell ill. My body, already frail, gave in to fever and weakness. My hands shook, my voice faltered, and for the first time I could not rise to sweep the courtyard or prepare tea. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it would end. Quiet, invisible, forgotten. But something unexpected happened. My son sat by my bedside, his eyes red from sleeplessness. My daughter-in-law brought soup, carefully feeding me spoon by spoon. My grandchildren hovered close, their small hands stroking mine, whispering, "Don't leave us, Daddy." I watched them with tears in my eyes. They were seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years. One night, when the fever broke, I opened my eyes to find my son still sitting there. His hand gripped mine tightly. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Ma, forgive me. I didn't understand. I was blinded by responsibilities, by money, by pressure. I forgot what you mean to us. You are not a burden. You never were." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but my heart felt light. I squeezed his hand weakly. "Beta, I forgave you long ago. I was only waiting for you to forgive yourself." He broke down, resting his forehead against my hand. For the first time in years, I felt the little boy in him again. The boy who once clung to me, afraid of the dark. From that day forward, things began to change. Slowly, yes, but truly. My children no longer spoke of me as an expense. They began to involve me in conversations, to sit with me after dinner, to ask me about my past. My daughter-in-law, once distant, now sought my advice on raising the children, and my grandchildren. They became my shadow, following me everywhere, as if afraid to lose me. One evening, my son said quietly, "Ma, you were right. Life's value is not in money. It is in love and wisdom. You've given us both in abundance. We are ashamed it took us so long to see it." I smiled gently. "Better late than never, Beta. What matters is that you see me now." In the final years of my life, I no longer waited for respect. I lived it. I no longer begged for love. I gave it freely. And in return, it bloomed. And when the day finally came for me to rest, I knew I would not be remembered as a burden. I would be remembered as the mother who built, the grandmother who loved, the woman who stood tall even when the world tried to bend her. Because dignity, once claimed, cannot be erased. And so, I leave behind this truth. If anyone ever whispers that you are too much, too costly, too needy, too difficult, remember this: you are not a burden. You are a blessing. Your life is not measured in rupees or convenience, but in the love you have given, the lives you have touched, the wisdom you carry, and even if the world forgets, your soul knows its worth. That is the legacy of love. That is the legacy I leave.